Good evening, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. This is Dave Colter. And let me see if I can get our first screen. Oops, we lost control of this. Welcome to Walk-In Volunteers, Expedient Training and Job Placement. I'm Dave Colter, WA1ZCN, the training guy for New Hampshire Aries, creator of the Aries Academy and the original editor and principal author of ARRL's emergency communications courses. I'll be your presenter tonight. My online producer taking care of behind the scenes tasks is Steve Nelson, WA1EYF. You can use the Q&A feature to ask questions, but I'll hold off answering them until the end of the presentation. If you find your question has already been answered, you can delete the question or just leave it there and Steve will take care of that. This and all New England Aries Academy courses will be posted on our YouTube channel for viewing later. So today we'll talk about how to manage and best use volunteers who appear out of nowhere during every disaster. As short-staffed as most Aries groups are, we need to make the best use of these spontaneous volunteers. So we're going to talk about the types of volunteers, managing difficult situations, volunteer intake, training, documentation, and resources. Some of the information in this class is directed primarily to Aries leadership, but most of it applies to deployed Aries members in general. If you've ever worked a disaster, you'll know this to be true. Hams you've never seen before just show up, which is good. Some are useful, some are not, and a few need to leave right now, but we're going to help sort that out this evening. The thing is, as much as we need the help, we still need to be careful about who we bring into our operations and to those of our served agencies, and make sure those we do bring in have a good experience. So maybe they'll come back and stay with us. We're going to start tonight by talking about how to be sure the volunteers you accept will be an asset rather than a liability. For every volunteer who shows up, there's a getting to know you process. You'll need to assess them pretty quickly because you probably have other work to do. Here are just a few of the many volunteer types you'll encounter. Some you'll be glad to put to work immediately. Others will need some level of instruction and coaching before they add much value. And a very small number could actually cause serious problems. So the best thing you can find is the current or former Aries member who has some training and experience. They learn quickly and get into it pretty quickly. It's just kind of a refresher for them. If you get a skilled ham with no Aries experience, they're also pretty good, especially contesters. Xers, they're good at managing on-air chaos pretty well and pulling weak signals out of the noise. You get a new ham with an HT and not much else. They're eager, they're useful. You can train them. It's going to take a little more work, but they are not disposable in any way. These are actually the best people to get involved because they might stay and become an active part of Aries. Then there's the one who knows it all better than you. I have met this fella more than once. They want to be put in charge right now because you're not doing it right. And they'll tell you that. It's unfortunate these people are out there, but they are. So the first three you might keep. They're experienced and trained, some relevant skills, green but eager to learn. The last guy you send packing nicely, if you can do it, with a police escort, if you can't. Been there too. For the keepers, you're immediately faced with a choice. What will you do with them? A lot depends on your current needs. If your site needs help and they're a good fit, teach them what they need to know and put them to work. If your site can't utilize their skills, is there another site nearby that could? During a disaster, you'll find that many volunteers won't want to get too far from home, so be sure to ask about that. Are you volunteering here, or can we send you somewhere else? If you can't use them right now, find out how to contact them later on. If they need skills they don't have, send them home with warm thanks for volunteering and suggest that they get in touch with the group once things are back to normal. If they're interested in joining and getting trained, because there are some operations where you just don't have the need for someone without specific skills. That happens. So what are some likely disqualifiers? If a guy shows up, or a woman for that matter, medical condition that could put them at risk, that's not a good thing. You don't want to be dealing with that too. If their availability is too limited, oh, I'm only got a half hour, can I help? Well, not much. If their license is expired or they don't have one, they might be useful if they have other skills, because somebody can be a control operator. That's a personal call. If they've got a poor attitude or if they're immature, they're discards. Unless you're desperate for help, the people in red here, you're probably not going to want to keep around. If their attitude is poor, they're immature, they act like they're entitled to be there, poor personal hygiene, which during a disaster, sometimes you have to look the other way. It's a judgment call. Apparent mental illness and a weak grasp on reality is a real problem, because it's difficult to convince these people that they're not right for the job without insulting them. And a lot of them don't understand where they are mentally. And then the wannabe important type is risky at best to bring in. We had a member of an organization with us. He was a ham, but he wanted to also be other things. And we found him out directing traffic in the middle of the road one time. The cops called us up and said, "Who is this guy?" Turned out to be one of us who just decided he was bored of the radio and decided to go direct traffic. He got chased home. So some early decision questions. When you're trying to make a decision about a volunteer, here are some of the questions you can ask yourself. It's always going to be a judgment call. With the exception of the 4 automatic disqualifiers we just discussed, every person and situation will require a little thought. They seem like a quick study, able to easily grasp how we operate. Do you have an appropriate assignment for them? Will they need constant supervision, or do they seem as though they could work independently? How much physical support will they need? Does it all add up to a net benefit to the operation or not? That's really what it comes down to. Are they an asset or a liability? So how do you tell someone no nicely? The toughest ones are the personal issues. If they're pretty level-headed folks, it's just a matter of skills or other non-personal issues. It's generally pretty easy. They generally will accept the reason you give and head for home. For the more difficult volunteer types, though, you may need some strategies to say no and not create new problems. You should always be diplomatic, stay calm, and don't make up excuses that are not based in reality, because that can cause problems later. They'll come back to bite you. And sometimes there's a way to use a marginal volunteer in a way that won't risk damage to your operations or to our image or to the image and operations of our served agencies. And then you just avoid a rejection issue. You're giving them something to do. It may not be what they want, but at least you're not having to deal with someone who's angry with you. That's a big judgment call. So other ways you can do it. If the job is supporting an agency that wants all volunteers vetted, get some information and explain that the process may not happen fast enough to help this time. Let them know it's not our rules. You can also use other requirements if you have them, like training IDs, insurance, or credentials, but only if you really have them. As I point out on the slide here are lies tend to reveal themselves quickly. You tell them, well, we don't need any more help. And then you're on the repeater an hour later saying, geez, we could really use some more help out here. Because they're going to hear it. You know it's going to happen. So on rare occasions, you will encounter someone who thinks it's their constitutional right to volunteer, no matter what you tell them. These are the folks who give you headaches. Most important, don't lose your cool. Explain that they really do have to leave, that you're willing to call police. That's often enough to solve the problem. However, keep their information just in case they cause problems later. You want to know who they were or are. If you think things are getting out of hand, find a way to discreetly call for police assistance, or at least have a second or third person standing with you, and then deal with it. So you've decided to keep them. Well, since most volunteers will be perfectly acceptable, you need a plan to bring them on board. You want to be sure a volunteer knows what they're getting into. Disaster operations don't always include climate control and flush toilets. It can be long and the work tedious. Make sure they're committed to dealing with the situation in a positive manner. With all the effort needed to bring in and train a walk-in volunteer, you really want them to stick around. You spend a lot of time training somebody and they bail on you, it's kind of a waste. To avoid future liability, though, gather and retain some basic information about the volunteer, their identity, emergency contacts, qualifications, and whatever you need to feel comfortable with them or to meet group or agency requirements. I strongly recommend taking pictures of IDs with a smartphone and sharing the information with at least one other Aries leader. And one way to do that very simply is just to line up all the IDs that he's got, whether it's the Aries card and a driver's license, and a Red Cross card, any of those things. You just line them up, take one picture. That way you've got it all. And when you save it, make sure you save it at full resolution so it can be read. If there's information that you need on the back side of a card, be sure to flip it over and take that side too. Driver's license is a good way to confirm someone's identity, by the way, just to make sure you're talking to the right guy if there's any question. If they've got training certifications, chances are you're going to have to take their word for it. If they've taken courses like this one, we don't offer any proof of that. So you're going to have to ferret that out in conversation. And sometimes you just need an intelligent, warm body to handle whatever task is needed at the moment. There aren't time or resources to do more than just put them to work, regardless of skills. Sometimes it's just that way during a disaster. Everybody's shoveling against the tide, so you just hand them a spoon, tell them to join in. But if you have the luxury of a few minutes and no screaming problems, you might want to at least attempt a good fit so you get the most out of your new volunteer. You could take a little interviewing to discover which skills and talents they possess. However, because they won't have any direct experience with your operations, it would make sense to put them into a low intensity position for a while. And a good way to do this is to pair them with an experienced operator until they get the hang of it. So here's some job ideas. If the volunteer's family is at a shelter, that's a great place to assign them. That makes everybody in the family happy. Working alongside a net control as their logger is a great way to learn how we work, and it frees up the NCS to focus on running the net. If you have multiple frequencies that need to be monitored or responded to, set them up with needed radios and a log sheet. If they seem like a good fit, they can shadow an agency staffer as their personal radio operator. If they're going to help from home, not stick around, they could do net logging there, because net loggers don't need to be sitting next to the NCS. They can log from afar. They can also do out the window sit reps. This is true of all Aries people. If you can't get out, volunteer in the field, you can't deploy to the field, it is well worth looking out the window periodically, and if they're requesting sit reps, to tell them what's going on, situation reports. The water's rising in my neighborhood, the trees are down, whatever else they need to know about your neighborhood. My telephone's out, and my drop wire is still up to the pole, so we know it's not my drop, it's the neighborhood, that kind of thing. And if you think of anything else they can handle, give it a try. You could hand them an Expedient training form. This two-sided form gives a new volunteer all the basics and the big picture of how Aries operates. Go over the form with them, answer some questions, and help them write event information on the back. You'll see here there's this, actually bring my mouse over here. There's a space on the bottom right where you can write in information. This form is available on our website, the New Hampshire Aries website, and the link will be showing up here in a moment. I created this form originally for the ARRL emergency communications courses about 20 years ago, and I adapted it later on for use in New Hampshire. Your area can do the same thing. This is something that needs to come from Aries leaders, though. It's not something just anyone should create or print out and hand out, because every area's operations are a little bit different. Hopefully we all do things in a standard enough way that we can help each other out without having to learn something entirely new. But that gives you the, let's see. All right, so here's where you can download the form. The URL is case sensitive, so copy it down exactly. The E in Expedient and T in training need to be capitalized, or it won't. It's www.nh-ares.org/forms/expedient training.pdf with, again, the E and the T capitalized. And that slide will show up again at the end of this presentation. Here are some other things you might give them. You can find all of these forms on the internet, but be careful that the ICS 213 message form version you have is the one used in your area. There are several variations floating around. The ARRL forms are available from ARRL.org or on the New Hampshire Aries website, nh-ares.org, and you go to the forms page. 2 or 3 copies of each of these things would be good to have in your Go kit, just in case a volunteer wanders in, you can handle it to them. If you're going to hand out temporary Aries ID cards, be sure it's done in accordance with your group's rules and procedures. This is, again, something that should come from the top, from the EC or the SEC. And the IDs will be primarily for identifying themselves to other Aries members rather than to agency staff, because they're temporary cards. So if you want the ID to be recognized outside Aries, you probably need to talk to the agency people, show them a sample, and tell them that this card is as good as the regular cards we carry. Hopefully you're not using these cards for your primary cards, because there's better to be had out there. Unfortunately, ARRL is not offering them just yet. If you need to supply these cards, get a hold of Steve at ARRL HQ. See, I thought I had his information right here on a slide. But anyway, Steve Ewald, WV1X, he's the field organization supervisor at headquarters in Newington, and he will get you a set. He's not in the office full-time, but he is checking email, and he and his assistant should be able to get some information to get a package to any EC who requests them, or SEC. I believe the requests have to come from leadership, probably for good reason. If the agency you're supporting rather requires a liability release form, or if your group uses them, keep a few in your Go kit. As with all other volunteer information, a quick photo of the completed form provides a good backup copy. If your group created one for Aries, please note that any forms like this must be approved by ARRL's attorney. Again, Stevie Wald's your contact. He will put you through to the right people. Any kind of legal document or legal-like document that we use, because we are just a program within ARRL, has to be approved by ARRL counsel. That includes MOUs. If your state offers workers' comp insurance, there's probably rules around this. And you need to know what they are so that if a new volunteer comes in, you can tell them, you know, you will or you will not be covered by workers' compensation insurance. Aries has no insurance of its own, which has always been a bit of a rubbing point, but they've never found a way to do it, I guess. Some of the states' rules may require the volunteer to be a fully vetted member in order to get coverage. A walk-in volunteer would not be covered. Other states, it could be different, but you need to know this stuff up front. So I would investigate it. If the event you're supporting is large or long-term, which could happen with a major hurricane, or in the very unlikely event that here in New England we see a big earthquake, we're told that's not likely. You're going to need lots more volunteers. So we'll be activating Aries, Matt, through ARRL headquarters, trying to bring them in from outside. And there'll be people who just come, spontaneous show-ups anyway. Sometimes it's worth having a volunteer intake center. Sometimes your agency will have one and you can co-locate. The best place to put these things is kind of at the edge of the affected area on a major road, so they can be easily accessed. And you may need more than one, depending on the size of the event and the different directions they could be coming from. You want to monitor 146.52, the national calling frequency, and any of the net frequencies you're using to find out who needs help where. If you have a section traffic and coordination net, as we do here in New Hampshire, you could be monitoring that and use that to be aware of any requests for help and to tell people, hey, we're sending you somebody and here's what they look like, what they're driving, name, call sign, all that stuff. And by the time they get there, hopefully the people that are coming to help will know what to do with them. Let's see. You might even grab one of the people that you have coming in as a volunteer to help you with this whole operation, because if you don't have enough people in the intake center, you have to have somebody doing the training, hopefully somebody who knows the situation, but you may need somebody to be on the radio, and that could be that person just coming in the door for you. Anyway, the volunteer intake center is where a small team would document, train, and dispatch incoming volunteers. The team will need to be in touch with the SEC or ECs in the affected area to determine who needs help and what type. You don't want to send them something they don't need. That's the only way you're going to be relatively certain of good matches. Don't forget to tell the person requesting help that you've sent someone their way and all their information. It might be worth mentioning this is likely to be a pretty chaotic environment. Making contact with the ECs in the affected area is going to be difficult at best. So tell the new volunteers it could take a while. And even though they're champing at the bit to get going, they're going to need to be patient. As with anything else we do, we need to prepare and train our members to handle volunteer intake, because people might not come through an intake center where we process them. They may just show up. So everybody needs to have a reasonably good idea of how we handle what we've already talked about today. Every active member should be familiar with your group's procedures and forms and how to evaluate and process a walk-in volunteer. One great way to train is with role play. I've actually done this. You have one person who has thought through all the different types of volunteers and is going to play act them. And other members can play the intake volunteer, who's deciding whether to keep them or not. And you can have a lot of fun with that. You can get over the jitters of being on stage, so to speak. Just take some practice. So here's some intake materials for your Go Kit. The Expedient training forms, the ARRL FSD 208 and FSD 220 info cards. They used to print those things on cards and hand them out at Hamfests, and they were available for the asking at ARRL. They're not anymore. They're available online. You can print them either in card size or a full size, but they're basically information sheets that you can use as reference material for incoming volunteers. If you don't have them, haven't seen them, I really suggest getting your hands on some. Again, this is something you can get right off the web. Just search on ARRL FSD 208 and FSD 220, and they'll pop right up. You want some message forms in some bulk, maybe 10 or 15 each, the radiogram and the ICS 213, because that's what you're going to go through. Every new volunteer coming in is probably going to need to have a handful. If there's any local or agency specific forms you use instead of the radiogram and ICS 213, I hope that's not happening, but it could, I suppose. Then of course you're going to want some copies of those. If you have some temporary ID cards that your EC has issued to you guys as part of your emergency kit for bringing new volunteers, you have that in there. You don't need a large pile of all of this stuff. It's enough to get into a Ziploc bag. I got some of those jumbo bags. Those are very handy. They have the 8x11 bags or 8x12 bags. It's really hard to get a sheaf of papers in the zipper. The bigger ones, the jumbos, work great. After the event, well, if you've fallen in love with a new volunteer, you probably want them to stick around for the long haul. Before they leave, make sure they know they were appreciated and that you value their skills. Follow up after the event to see if you can get them to join or at least take additional training so they'll be more valuable when there's a next time. There might be. Even the ones you'd be just as happy never seeing again deserve some level of thanks for volunteering. Please don't leave anyone out. So here are the resources I was mentioning earlier. Excuse me. ARRL.org/Aries will get you right into the Aries section of the League's website. And of course, the link to the Expedient training form we talked about before. And when there's other resources on the NH-Ares.org website, we have a fairly extensive training section with a lot of downloads. There's a training page, and there's a link on the training page to the downloads page. This will get you there. And we have a forms section with all the forms we've talked about and some others that are local. But these are things that are pretty universal by and large. So if you can't find them elsewhere, you can certainly find them here. Most of this stuff, with the exception of the Expedient training form, is available on the League website too. So I guess it's time for questions. And Steve, have we got anything here? I see you've had two and answered them already. I'm not seeing anything else up, so we may have answered all the questions on the way through.
I think you might have done that. I encourage anybody to post questions if they have them. Post them right now.
Well, that's a good question. You know, what would you do differently in a COVID-19 disaster? And frankly, it's nothing different than what we're doing now. we use a common sense to separate people as much as possible, wear masks, try not to cough on each other. It's really not a lot else we can do differently. When you're in a disaster situation, a lot of things that we would normally do are going to go by the wayside, I'm afraid. You just have to do the best you can. And it says, hey, Steve, how about posting the slides on the New Hampshire Aries website? We do that. Actually, I'm the guy who does it, not Steve. I'm also the webmaster. We will be posting slides from many of these in the training section in the downloads page. You'll see there are some earlier New Hampshire Aries Academy slides there. The last one, we didn't upload any, and I don't remember the reason why. But we'll be uploading the slides from this one there, at least the ones we have permission to use from the presenters. Okay, is there a list of specific skills or tasks one could be asked to perform so we could prepare? That depends on what your group is doing at any given time. So you may have a radio operator in a shelter. That's one job. Net control is another. A roving operator who is doing disaster assessment, maybe with the Red Cross, or doing situation reports out there in the field. So there's quite a few different things you could be doing, and it really depends on the situation. There are probably as many jobs as I can think of disasters. So it's kind of hard to give you a finite list. What I would do, if you have some people in your group who have been through a disaster or two, talk with them about what they would do with incoming volunteers and maybe share this presentation with them. Yeah. Does ARRL have a volunteer handbook by chance? Not that I know of. However, they do have the emergency communications book. That's out there. There's several of them you can buy. The books that I wrote for the league are no longer available. The old level 1, 2, and 3 books. Those have been kind of concatenated into fatter book, which you can now purchase from ARRL. Hopefully that will be enough. Most of the material that's in the ARECC course, which, by the way, I would recommend you take if you haven't. Most of the material is the stuff I did 20 years ago, but they have done some updates to it. And it's a good course. You get a mentor. Hopefully you get a good one who has been around the block a few times and give you a lot of other information that's helpful. But it's a great course. It's now free. Something we begged for a long time, but it finally happened. Do we use NBEMS or Winlink? Yes, both. And we're having a discussion about whether that's, something we want to revise and just go down to one, or whether we need to have two, because there's a training element and there's a lot of, I would say, training maintenance that needs to go with those two tools. That's, it's a big deal, frankly, keeping enough skilled people for NBEMS or Winlink. NBEMS is a great tool. It has gotten a lot fatter over the years. It's a lot more to learn. Winlink is still pretty austere. It sort of operates itself. Once you get it set up and running and learn its various tricks, it's much simpler. But it doesn't do some things that you can do with NBEMS and vice versa. So that's an open discussion right now, even here. Says, I belong to 2 organizations that are organized. We are not allowed to self-deploy. It seems strange to me that it appears to be allowed in Aries. We don't allow self-deployment within our own membership. What will happen is that Joe Ham, who's not an Aries member, will show up and ask to help. That's the reality out there. but our own members, at least in New Hampshire, are told do not self-deploy. That's kind of a mantra here. And those old Aries ID cards are still available. An EC or an SEC would be able to request them, but call Steve Ewald down at headquarters, WV1X, and Steve will get them to you. In fact, the one that showed up in this presentation, I had Steve send me because I couldn't find my supply anywhere. Could Aries help to alert authorities of behaviors or groups in a community who appear not to be in compliance with the health protocols? If they ask, certainly. It's not part of our normal role. We support an agency. So if the agency wants this information, certainly we can provide that. I don't know if I can say anything more about that, but there's another course we did a few years ago for New Hampshire, and it was called Signals Intelligence. And of course, that was a sexy military term, so we got a big turnout. But what it really is paying attention to media sources, listening to other radio, not police and fire, because that's being monitored by the EOC. We don't need to tell them what's happening on police and fire. It's just wasting time. But if you're monitoring FRS or CB, you can sometimes glean what's going on in the neighborhood. And it's perfectly legal to relay that information. Monitoring other things and relaying that information, not so much. But social media, CB and FRS are fair game, and that information could be aggregated or characterized. You were hearing a lot of chatter about not enough food or people running out of water, or the water's rising around everybody's homes and they're getting nervous. Those kinds of things, if you're hearing that kind of chatter, can be passed on. Let's see. I intended to put organized using ICS. Oh, I see. Okay, this is Chris's comment from before. Also, we upload our certs to a thumb drive. I assume by certs you mean members. So you know who's who. That's not a bad thing as long as you have a working computer in the field. I am a fan of paper. I have had computers decide to fail on me or run out of battery right in the middle of an event. That's never a good thing. So I've got all my critical information on paper. I do not have membership lists that way, though, only because you just break the bank constantly reprinting them. I used to do that a long time ago, 20 years ago, before thumb drives existed. But I do carry our Aries plans and all that on the thumb drive and also on the computer. Okay, I guess if we have no more new questions popping up, we can wrap it up for tonight. And I want to thank everybody for coming and Steve for helping me put this thing together for tonight. Remind everyone that all the live classes are being recorded and we're posting them to the New England Aries Academy channel on YouTube. And there'll be more material showing up there hopefully someday. When we get past this event, if for many who don't know, was supposed to be live at the New England Division Convention. And when that had to be canceled, we thought about ways to do this, and this happened. This was actually kind of serendipitous. We figured out that this actually works quite well. And we may do this going forward in addition to having some live content at the convention, but we'll see. There's still time to figure this out. Oops, I see more stuff popping in on the bottom of the question screen here. I need to scroll, get my mouse back on that screen.
Just want to remind the participants that we have 2 more sessions, one tomorrow night and one workshop on Saturday. And if you haven't registered for those, please go to hamexposition.org and register for those.
That's ham with an X, POS, not EX. Just drop the E. Okay, thanks very much, folks. And I'm going to end the event
Thank you, Dave.
when I figure out where the button is. Steve, if you're seeing it, go ahead and hit it.